Hello, viewers. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, today's a very interesting day, isn't it? I actually like you can't see it right now, but I am wearing a jacket because I turned on the aircon. Also, I have a new pair of glasses. I drew these glasses in like how long? 3 minutes. Anyway, how's everybody? It's middle of the afternoon. Not sure if anyone's here. But hello. Anyway, welcome to the stream. Today's gonna be a very interesting one because as I said, not gaming. Nope. We're actually reading. Let me just pull it up. War of the Worlds. There it is. This is the hard copy book that I'm actually reading from, and for what's it called? For for ambience. Sorry, everybody. My mind is not working because I was just like playing Modern Warfare and I was just mostly doing my own stuff. So, yeah. I felt like I needed to prepare a bit more, but it's okay. I just wanted to expand a bit more on what I'm doing today. Anyway, what am I saying? So, we'll be covering the hard copy version of War of the Worlds, and this is published by. Let me just pull it up. This is published by Penguin Classics, edited by Patrick Perinder, with an introduction by Brian Eldis and notes by Andy Sawyer. So we'll be reading from this book today, and I'll be turning off the music. And yeah, I'll turn off the music so that we can hold on, give me a second. Alright, so I'll turn off the music so that we can listen to the book, to the reading in a bit. And here are some general guidelines for today's reading stream. Oh, no one can read this. Hey, Shark, welcome to the stream. Yeah, sorry, no one can read this. Oh my god, that is really bad. Let me just pull this up real quick. So, how does this reading stream work? Okay, just read this up, and then I'll take this down. Okay, so, okay, I the text is so bad. Oh my god. Hold on. Oh no, that's even worse. Okay, there you go. All right, so here it is. It actually looks even worse, but I'm putting it in my head. So welcome to the reading stream. So here is how it will go generally, as I planned out in my head. I will read the selected story uninterrupted for 30 minutes, and then after that, I will take a 5-minute break to regain my breath because I'll probably be doing some impromptu voice acting as well, and during this time, I may ask the audience a few questions regarding what we have read so far. And then that's it. That's really just it. This is more like a small test for my, my teaching experience. So yeah, that's why I have the reading glasses, because I just wanted to make sure that, everyone can be kept up to speed. And yeah, that's it, basically. So before we begin, read till the end. Actually, no, because this book is fairly long. I'm looking at it right now. this book counts at around. Let me see. For my university, I was covering this book, and this book kind of starts for a long time, and it has around. All right, let me just do a brief recount. It has 185 pages, including appendixes. So I am going to say this book is going to be pretty long, and if everyone really likes this stream, I'll keep reading this book for the meantime. I'll have to find other books to read in, and other than that, so yeah, this book is gonna be quite long. I hope you guys can tahan for a bit. And so Shark, how are you? While you think about that, I will start to read a little bit about George Wells, H.G. Wells. Full name: Herbert George Wells, born 1866, lower middle class parents. Most defining accident of his life: he fell down. It's kind of sad, but oh, you're fine. Ah, that's good. That's good. That's good. All right, that's good. Hello. I see someone else join. Welcome to the stream. I'm now. Yeah, he fell down, but that's a good part because, according to this introduction, again, how about me? I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm really just kind of excited actually because I've never read a book on live, and I'll be having music in a short time so that we don't feel too awkward. So I'll just start off with the introduction. So let me see. Sympathy and books came his way, and personally, he has said this fall was one of the luckiest events of my life. So basically, yeah, when you're stuck with books, some things can just happen. It's just like, mm, mm, and it just kind of clicks in your head. And Wells has a very patchy education, and it's very interesting. Did not get a degree, but ended up really good. He was under a very great. He was under the tutelage of a great scientist named Thomas Huxley. If you look him up, he's a great. He was also a student of the late Charles Darwin, so he has a vested interest into biology. So yeah, it's gonna be really fun if you look up his history. And yeah, without going into further that, Huxley influenced Wells, and after Wells did a lot more science fiction works, he decided to work on War of the Worlds. And War of the Worlds is well, it is science fiction because it involves alien invaders. However, Wells' book may actually more accurately fall in the genre of invasion literature because this was around 1898 and tensions in the world were rising. So yeah, basically this is an alien invasion, but at the time alien life forms were just completely unknown because I mean, consider our modern timeline and put it into perspective. We're very used to the idea of aliens, right? And we're very used to seeing stuff like Mass Effect, stuff like Halo, and aliens that want to kill us, and that seems very normal, and we're looking for extraterrestrial life form right now, right? And if you look at it from the perspective of a Victorian London, not Victorian London, pre-World War One civilization, the idea of aliens from outer space is preposterous and also quite controversial. So this book was very interesting for its time, but let me get back to my original point. War of the Worlds itself is considered invasion literature, and what I mean by this is that this actually kind of illustrates the fear of Britain when its neighbors actually started to rise up and gain more technological power. So invasion literatures include very early on the Battle of Dorking, which is a human. Most of these invasion literatures were theoretical and always involve other world nations, usually Germans. Yeah, yeah. This is before World War One, so you can kind of tell everyone was scared of Germans. And after that, yeah, invasion literature. No, oh no, Shark. Germans, yeah, they were getting really aggressive. I remember they were under the Kaiser, and the Kaiser, Caesar. I don't know. Do they say Caesar or Kaiser? Kaiser. And there's just a lot of things going on. And yeah, Battle Dorking started off, and then after that, it kind of grew. And War of the Worlds is a sci-fi take on it, really. Then again, invasion literature just kind of set way for other stuff anyway. So That's enough for invasion literature. I would like to see. Let me see. No further reading. So there's further reading attached to this book. So let me just. Alright, here we go. We're at the title page. So I'm going to read out the content. So we have book one. The Coming of the Martians. Eve of the War, which is page 7. The Falling Star. And Hornhorsel's Common. The Cylinder Opens. The Heat Ray in the Chopham Road. How I Reach Home. Friday Night. The Fighting Begins. In the Storm. At the Window. And what I saw of the destruction of Weybridge and Shepperton. So basically, we're gonna cover around. Hopefully, there's a lot of time to cover a lot of these pages. So yeah, we only can cover bit time. No, don't fall asleep. I'm gonna put a lot of effort into this. Shark. Anyway, so yeah, let me just real quick. Okay. So book 2 will be very short. So if I have time in the future, I might just cover it because it goes from pages 100 to 115 to 177. So around that would be. Oh, it's okay, Shark. I was just joking around. I'm sorry if I made you feel sad. So basically, that would be around. Let me see, 50 plus pages. Yeah, that would be 50 plus pages. So I will begin by reading the first chapter, Eve of the War. And let me just quickly put up the music. And we'll be listening to the Tiberian Sun soundtrack, which I think will be the perfect one. The perfect soundtrack for this outer space endeavor. So let me start again the music, and we will begin. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. As as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe with about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible that the infusoria under the microscope may do the same. No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as sources of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. All right. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. At most, terrestrial men fancied there might be other men upon Mars, perhaps inferior to themselves and ready to welcome a missionary enterprise. Yet across the gulf and space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. And early in the 20th century came the great disillusionment. The planet Mars, I scarcely need to remind the reader, revolves about the sun at a mean distance of 140 million miles, and that the light and heat it receives from the sun is barely half of that received by this world. It must be, if the nebular hypothesis has any truth, older than our world, and long before this earth has ceased to be molten, life upon its surface must have begun its course. The fact that it is scarcely 1/7 of the volume of the earth must have accelerated its cooling to a temperature at which life could begin. It has air and water and all that is necessary for the support of animated existence. Yet so vain is man, and so blinded by his vanity, that no writer, up to the very end of the 18th century. Oh wait, I forgot to turn on the music. Sorry. Let me try again. Hold on. Wait, this music is not right. Give me a second. I'm going to really quickly. Okay, there you go. Okay, there you go. All right, sorry for the try again. Yeah, sorry. The music kind of turned on. But it's okay. Let me try this. Yet so vain is man, and so blinded by his vanity, that no writer up to the very end of the 19th century expressed any idea that the intelligent life might have developed there far, or indeed at all, beyond its earthly level. Nor was it generally understood that since Mars is older than our Earth, with scarcely a quarter of the superficial area and remoter from the Sun, it necessarily follows that it is not only more distant from life's beginning, but nearer its end. The secular cooling that must someday overtake our planet has already gone far indeed with our neighbor. Its physical condition is still largely a mystery, but we know now that even in its equatorial region, the midday temperature barely approaches that of our coldest winter. Its air is much more attenuated than ours. Its oceans have shrunk, until they cover but a third of its surface. And as its slow seasons change, huge snow caps gather and melt about either pole and periodically inundate its temperate zones. That last stage of exhaustion, which to us is still incredibly remote, has become a present-day problem for the inhabitants of Mars. The immediate pressure of necessity has brightened their intellects, enlarged their powers, and hardened their hearts. And looking across space with instruments and intelligence such as we have scarcely dreamed of, they see, at its nearest distance, only 35 million miles sunwards of them, a morning star of hope. Our own warmer planet, green with vegetation and grey with water, with a cloudy atmosphere eloquent of fertility, and with glimpses through its drifting cloud wisps of broad stretches of populous country and narrow, navy-crowded seas. And we, men, the creatures who inhabit this earth, must be to them at least as alien and lowly as are the monkeys and lemurs to us. The intellectual side of man already admits that life is an incessant struggle for existence, and that it would seem that this too is the belief of minds on Mars. Their world is far gone in its cooling, and this world is still crowded with life, but crowded only with what they regard as inferior animals. To carry warfare sunward is, indeed, their only escape from the destruction that generation after generation creeps upon them. And before we judge them too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon the animals, such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but upon its inferior races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likenesses, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles to mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? The Martians seem to have calculated their descent with amazing subtlety. Their mathematical learning is evidently far in excess to ours, and to have carried out their preparations with a well-nigh perfect unanimity. Had our instruments permitted it, we might have seen the gathering trouble far back in the 19th century. Men like Schiaparelli watched the red planet. It is odd, by the by, that for countless centuries Mars has been the star for war, but failed to interpret the fluctuating appearances of the marking they map so well. All that time, the Martians must have been getting ready. During the opposition of 1894, a great light was seen on the illuminated part of the disk, first at the Lick Observatory, then by Perrotin of Nice, and then by other observers. English readers heard of it first in the issue of Nature dated August 2nd, and I am inclined to think that this blaze may have been the casting of the huge gun in the vast pit sunk into their planet, from which their shots were fired at us. Peculiar markings, as yet unexplained, were seen at the site of that outbreak during the next two oppositions. The storm burst upon us 6 years ago now. As Mars approached opposition, Lavelle of Java set the wires of the astronomical exchange palpitating with the amazing intelligence of a huge outbreak of incandescent gas upon the planet. It had occurred towards the midnight of the 12th, and the spectroscope, to which he had once resorted, indicated a mass of flaming gas, chiefly hydrogen, moving with an enormous velocity toward this earth. This jet of fire had become invisible about 12:15. He had compared it with a colossal puff of flame suddenly and violently squirted out of the planet as flaming gases rushed out of a gun. A singularly appropriate phase, it approved. Yet the next day there was nothing of this in the papers except a little note in the Daily Telegraph, and the world went in ignorance of one of the gravest dangers that ever threatened the human race. I might not have heard of the eruption at all had I not met Ogilvy, the well-known astronomer at Ottershaw. He was immensely excited at the news, and in excess of his feelings invited me to take a turn with him that night in the scrutiny of the red planet. In spite of that, all that has happened since, I still remember that vigil distinctly, that black and silent observatory, the shadowed lantern throwing a feeble glow upon the floor in the corner, the steady ticking of the clockwork of the telescope, the little slit in the roof, an oblong profundity with the stardust streaked across it. Ogilvy moved about, invisible but audible. Looking through the telescope, one saw a circle of deep blue and the little round planets swimming in the field. It seemed such a thing, so bright and small and still, faintly marked with transverse stripes, and slightly flattened from the perfect round. But so little it was, so silvery warm, a pin's head of light. It was as if it quivered. But really, this was the telescope, vibrating with the activity of the clockwork that kept the planet at view. As I watched, the planet seemed to grow larger and smaller, and to advance and recede. But that was simply that my eye was tired. 40 million of miles it was from us, more than 40 million miles of void. Few people realize the immensity of vacancy in which the dust of the material universe swims. Near it in the field, I remember, were 3 faint points of light, 3 telescopic stars infinitely remote, and all around it was the unfathomable darkness of outer space, empty space. You know how that darkness looks on a frosty starlit night. In the telescope it seems far profounder and invisible to me, because it was so small, so remote, flying swiftly and steadily towards me across that incredible distance, drawing ever near every minute. By so many thousands of miles came the thing they were sending us, and the thing that was to bring so much struggle and calamity and death to the earth. I never dreamed of it then as I watched. No one on earth dreamt of that unnearing missile. That night too, there was another jetting of gas out of gas from the distant planet. I saw it, a reddish flash on the edge, at the slightest projection of the outline, just as the chronometer struck midnight. And at that I told Ogilvy, and he took my place. The night was warm, and I was thirsty, and I went, stretching my legs clumsily and feeling my way in the darkness. into the little table where the siphon stood, while ogively exclaimed at the streamer of gas that came out towards us. That night, another invisible missile started in its way to the Earth from Mars. Just a second or so under 24 hours after the first one. I remember how I sat on the table there in the blankness, with patches of green and crimson swimming before my eyes. I wish I had a light to smoke by, little suspecting that the meaning of the minute gleam I had seen, and all that would presently bring me. Ogively watched till 1, and then gave up, and relit the lantern and walked over to his house. Down below in the darkness were Ottershaw and Chertsey, and all of their 100 people sleeping in peace. He was full of speculation that night about the condition of Mars, and scoffed at the vulgar idea of its having inhabitants who were signaling us. His idea was that meteorites might be falling in a heavy shower upon the planet, or that a huge volcanic explosion was in progress. He pointed out to me how unlikely it was that organic evolution had taken the same direction in 2 adjacent planets. The chances of anything man-like on Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. Hundreds of observers saw the flame that night and the night after, about midnight, and again the night after, and so for 10 nights, a flame each. Why the shot ceased after the 10th, no one on Earth has attempted to explain. It may be the gases of the firing caused the Martians inconvenience. Dense cloud of smoke or dust visited through a powerful telescope on Earth as little grey, fluctuating patches spread through the clearness of the planet's atmosphere and obscured its more familiar features. Even the daily papers woke up to the disturbances at last, and popular notes appeared here, there, and everything concerning the volcanoes upon Mars. The serial-economic periodical Punch, I remember, made a happy use of it in the political cartoon, and all unsuspected, those missiles the Martians had fired at us drew earthward, rushing now at the pace of many miles a second through the empty gulf of space. Hour by hour and day, and nearer, it seems to me, now almost incredibly wonderful that, with that swift fate hanging over us, men could go about their petty concerns as they did. I remember how jubilant Markham was at securing a new photograph of the planet for the illustrated paper he edited in those days. People in these latter times scarcely realize the abundance and enterprise of our 19th century papers. For my own part, I was much occupied in learning to ride the bicycle, and busy upon a series of papers discussing the probable developments of moral ideas as civilization progressed. One night, the first missile then could scarcely have been 10 million miles away, I went for a walk with my wife. It was starlight, and I explained the signs of the zodiac to her, and pointed out Mars, a bright dot of light, creeping zenithward, towards which so many telescopes were pointed. It was a warm night. Coming home, a party of excursionists from Chertsey or Isleworth passed us singing and playing music. There were lights in the upper windows of the houses as the people went to bed. From the railway station in the distance came the sound of shunting trains, ringing and rumbling, softened almost into melody by the distance. My wife pointed out to me the brightness of the red, green, and yellow signal lights hanging in the framework of the sky. It seemed so safe and tranquil. Chapter 2, The Falling Star. Now give me a second. I will need to grab a cup of water. Oh, the reading has gotten my throat really dried up. Give me a second. Scam light. Not really. They're just alien lights. Alright, so I've drinking a bit of water. My throat is still somewhat dry. But don't worry. As I said again, we'll now move on to chapter 2, which is... Hold on, let me just see this again. Hmm. Chapter 2 is the falling star. Then came the night of the first falling star. It was seen early in the morning, rushing over Winchester inwards, a line of flame high in the atmosphere. Hundreds must have seen it and taken it for an ordinary falling star. Albin described it as leaving a greenish streak behind it that glowed for some seconds. Denning, our greatest authority on meteorites, stated that the height of its first appearance was about 90 or 100 miles. It seemed to him that it fell to Earth about 100 miles east of him. I was at home that hour and writing in my study, and although my French windows faced towards Ottershaw and the blind was up, for I loved in those days to look up in the night at the night sky, I saw nothing of it. Yet the strangest of things that ever came to Earth from outer space must have fallen while I was sitting there, visible to me had I only looked up as it passed. Some of those who saw its flight say it traveled with a hissing sound. I myself never heard that. Many people in Berkshire, Surrey, and Middlesex must have seen the fall of it, and at most have thought that another meteorite has descended. No one seemed to be troubled to look for the fallen mass that night. But very early in the morning, poor Ogilvy, who had seen the shooting star, and who was persuaded that a meteorite lay somewhere on the common between Horsham, Ottershaw, and Woking, rose early with the idea of finding it. Find it he did, soon after dawn, and not far from the sand pits. An enormous hole had been made by the impact of the projectile, and the sand and gravel had been flung violently in every direction over the heath, forming heaps visible a mile and a half away. The header was on fire eastward, and a thin blue smoke rose against the dawn. The thing itself lay almost entirely buried in sand. Amidst the scattered splinters of a fir tree, it had shivered to fragments in its descent. The uncovered parts had the appearance of a huge cylinder, caked and its outline softened by a thick, scaly, dun-colored incrustation. It had a diameter of about 30 yards, and he approached the mass, surprised at the size and more so at the shape, since most meteorites are rounded more or less completely. It was, however, still so hot from its flight through the air as to forbade his near approach. A strong stirring noise within the cylinder he ascribed to the unequal cooling of its surface, for at the time it had not occurred to him that it might be hollow. He remained standing at the edge of the pit that the thing had made for himself, staring at its strange appearance, astonished chiefly at its unusual shape and color, and dimly perceiving even then that some evidence of design in its arrival. The early morning was wonderfully still, and the sun, just clearing the pine trees towards Weybridge, was already warm. He did not remember hearing any birds that morning, and there was certainly no breeze stirring, and the only sounds were the faint movements from within the cindery cylinder. He was all alone on the common. Then suddenly, he noticed, with a start, that some of the grey clinker, the ashy incrustation that covered the meteorite, was falling off the circular edge of the end. It was dropping off in flakes, and raining down upon the sands. And a large piece suddenly came off, and fell with a sharp noise that brought his heart into his mouth. For a minute, he scarcely realized what this meant, and although the heat was excessive, he clambered down. Oh, my model's malfunctioning, sorry. He clambered down into the pit close to the bulk to see the thing more clearly. He fancied even then that the cooling of the body might account for this, but what disturbed that idea was the fact that the ash was falling only from the end of the cylinder, and then he perceived that very slowly, the singular top of the cylinder was rotating on its body. It was such a gradual movement that he discovered it only through noticing that a black mark that had been near him 5 minutes ago was now at the other side of the circumference. Even then, he scarcely understood what this indicated, until he heard a muffled grating and saw the black mark jerk forward an inch or so. Then the thing came upon him in a flash. The cylinder was artificial, hollow, and with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. "Good heavens," said Ogilvy. "There's a man in it! Man in it! Half roasted to death, trying to escape!" And at once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash upon Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal, and at that he stood irresolute for a moment, and turned, scrambled out of the pit, and set off wildly into Woking. The time then must have been somewhere about 6 o'clock. He met a wagoner and tried to make him understand, but the tale he told and his appearance was so wild, his hat had fallen off in the pit, that the man simply drove on. He was equally unsuccessful with the potman who was just unlocking the doors of the public house by Horshell Bridge. The fellow thought he was a lunatic at large, and made an unsuccessful attempt to shut him into the tap room. That sorted him a little, and when he saw Henderson, the London journalist, in his garden, he called over the Pollings and made himself understood. "Henderson," he called, "you saw that shooting star last night?" "Well," said Henderson, "it's out on the Horshell's Common right now." "Good Lord," said Henderson, "fallen meteorite. That's good." "But it is more than a meteorite. It's a cylinder. An artificial cylinder, man. And there's something inside." Henderson stood up with a spade in his hand. "What's that?" he said. He was deaf in one ear. Ogilvy told him that all he had seen. Henderson was a minute or so for taking it in. Then he dropped his spade, snatched up his jacket, and came out onto the road. The two men hurried back at once to the common, and found the cylinder still lying in the same position. But now the sounds inside had ceased, and a thin circle of bright metal showed between the top and the body of the cylinder. Air was entering or escaping at the rim with a thin sizzling sound. They listened, rapped on the scaly burnt metal with a stick, and meeting with no response, they both concluded that the man inside must be insensible or dead. Of course, the two were quite unable to do anything. They shouted consolation and promises, and went off back to the town again to get help. One can imagine them, covered with sand, excited and disordered, running up to the little street in the bright sunlight just as the shop folks were taking down their shutters, and people were opening their bedroom windows. Henderson went on and into the railway station at once in order to telegraph the news to London. The newspaper article had prepared men's minds for the reception of the idea. By 8 o'clock, a number of boys and unemployed men had already started for the common to see the dead man from Mars. That was the form the story took. I heard of it first from my newspaper boy about 9:15 when I went out to get my daily chronicle. I was naturally startled and wasted no time in going out and across the Ottershaw Bridge to the sand pits. And now we will move on to chapter 3 after another sip of my water. But first, I guess we can take a small break as it is now 30 minutes. Give me a second. So we're going to take a break for 5 minutes. Yeah, my throat is like gone. Sorry viewers, I tend to read for a very long time. That's some really good stuff. So how's the reading go so far, guys? Is it good? Sorry, my voice goes on for very long. I can spend time narrating all this kind of stuff for the longest time ever. And yeah. And basically, yeah. So Nina, are you there? I was thinking about a few questions. But some of the questions that you might ask, 10 out of 10. Thank you, Shark. Well, if any questions I like to ask, it's mostly based on whether you can spot any allegories in the book, like the intro beginning, between Wells's criticisms on on his own country, and how he juxtaposes how he. Oh, my reading is good. Oh yeah, I understand. Yeah, no problem, no problem. This may be able to help you understand some of it. Yeah, because this is a classic and written in a more archaic time, so I do understand if it just kind of, well, does not work. Uh. Sorry, let me just move out of my chair. My model's also acting up a little weirdly. So yeah, let me just. I just yawned a little bit and I cracked my back. So yeah, basically I would like to point out, maybe this is not a question, but maybe this is an explanation. The opening narration is slightly inspired by British colonialism at the time, as Wells mentions Tasmania, and how his people have taken over Tasmania and wiped out and conquered the local populace. Well, we can kind of attest to this because we are colonial. As far as I can remember from the history books, Malaysia is a British colonial empire, and he was probably referring to that in his depiction of the Martians, and that we were so busy with ourselves that we didn't think of anyone else doing the same thing to them. So yeah. All right. I need to bring more water. And let me see. For one question I can give you guys is, what other features from the introduction and the beginning can you infer from how the narrator puts it, and whether or not it is purely sci-fi science fiction, or does it actually reflect period related values? Let's say, like I sprung out just now, colonialism, because Mars, the allegory of Mars is, if you put it side by side with the period related information, you may start to see some similarities. And if you spot any, please do let me know in the comment box. It's slightly a bit heavy, I know, sorry. Okay, my throat is like really nice now. Shark, no, it's okay. The answers are for everyone, and actually, I don't expect like the first reading stream to be this interactive, so it's okay. So anyway, thank you for being here. At least someone's listening, and that's good. I'm always happy. We'll begin reading again in 30 seconds. And the next chapter will be on Horsel's Common. And then after this, we will reach another 30 minutes. No problem, no problem. If I have to say, because this is public domain, I can recommend you just go online and read this book yourself. You might be able to answer some questions. Okay? It's okay. I'm not officially a teacher, so yeah, I understand. So yeah, basically the alien music is just playing in the background as well. just take your time. Okay, so now we've reached 30 minutes, and now we will go on to reading chapter 3 on Horsel's Common. I found a little crowd of perhaps 20 people surrounding the huge hole in which the cylinder lay. I have already described the appearance of its colossal bulk, embedded in the ground. The turf and gravel about it seemed charred as if by a sudden explosion. No doubt its impact had caused a flash of fire. Henderson and Ogilvy were not there. I think they had perceived that nothing was to be done for the present, and gone away to breakfast at Henderson's house. There were 4 or 5 boys sitting on the edge of the pit, with their feet dangling, and amusing themselves until I stopped them by throwing stones at the giant mass. After I had spoken to them about it, they began playing at touch in and out of the group of bystanders. Sorry, there's a bit of saliva in my throat. Among those were a couple of cyclists, a jobbing gardener I employed sometimes, a girl carrying a baby, Greg the butcher, and his little boy, and 2 or 3 loafers and golf caddies who were accustomed to hang about at the railway station. There was very little talking. Few of the common people in England had anything but the vaguest astronomical ideas in those days. Most of them were staring quietly at the table-like end of the cylinder, which was still as Ogilvy and Henderson had left it. I fancied the popular expectation of a heap of charred corpses was disappointed at this inanimate bulk. Some went away while I was there, and some other people came. I clambered into the pit and fancied I heard a faint movement under my feet. The top had certainly ceased to rotate. It was only when I got thus close to it that the strangeness of this object was at all evident to me. At the first glance, it was really no more exciting than an overturned carriage or a tree blown across the road. Not so much, indeed. It looked like a rusty gas float. It required a certain amount of scientific education to perceive that the grayscale of the thing was no common oxide, that the yellowish white metal that gleamed in the crack between the lid and the cylinder had an unfamiliar hue. Extraterrestrial meaning had no meaning for most of the onlookers. At that time, it was quite clear in my own mind that the thing had come from the planet Mars, but I judged it improbable that it contained any living creature. I thought the unscrewing might be automatic. In spite of Ogilvy, I still believed that they were men on Mars. My mind ran fancifully on the possibilities of its containing manuscripts, of the difficulties in translation that might arise, whether we should find coins and models in it, and so forth. Yet it was little too large for assurance on this idea. I felt an impatience to see it opened. About 11, as nothing seemed to be happening, I walked back, full of such thoughts, to my home in Maybury, but I found it difficult to get to work upon my abstract investigation. In the afternoon, the appearance of the common had altered very much. The early editions of the evening papers had startled London with enormous headlines. A message received from Mars, remarkable story from Woking, and so forth. In addition, Ogilvy's wire to the Astronomical Exchange had roused every observatory in the 3 kingdoms. There were half a dozen flats or more from the Woking station, standing in the road and by the sandpits, a basket chaise from Cheltenham, and a rather lordly carriage. Besides that, there were quite a heap of bicycles. In addition, a large number of people must have walked, in spite of the heat of the day, from Woking and Chertsey, so that there was altogether quite a considerable crowd. 1 or 2 gaily dressed ladies among the others. It was glaring hot, and not a cloud in the sky, nor a breath of the wind, and the only shadow was that of a few scattered pine trees. The burning heather had been extinguished, but the level ground towards Ottershaw was blackened as far as one could see, and still giving off vertical streamers of smoke. An enterprising sweetstuff dealer in the Cheltenham Road had set up his son with a barrel load of green apples and ginger beer. Going to the edge of the pit, I found it occupied by a group of about half a dozen men, Henderson, Ogilvy, and a tall ferret-haired man that I afterwards learned was Stent, the astronomer royal, with several workmen clearing welding spades and pickaxes. Stent was giving the directions in a clear and high-pitched voice. He was standing on the cylinder, which was now evidently much cooler, his face crimson and streaming with perspiration, and something seemed to have irritated him. A large portion of the cylinder had been uncovered, though its lower end was still embedded. As soon as Ogilvy saw me among the staring crowd on the edge of the pit, he called to me to come down, and asked me if I would mind going over to see Lord Hilton, Lord of the Manor. The glowing crowd, he said, was becoming a serious impediment to the excavation, especially the boys. They wanted a light railing put up, and help keep the people back. He told me that a faint stirring was occasionally still audible within the case, but that the workmen had failed to unscrew the top, as it afforded no grip on them. The case appeared to be enormously thick, and it was possible that the faint sounds we heard represented a noisy tumult in the interior. I was very glad to do as he asked, and so become one of the privileged spectators within the contemplated explosion. I failed to find Lord Hilton at his house, but I was told that he was expected from London by the 6 o'clock train from Waterloo, and it was then about 5:15 I went home, had some tea, and walked up to the station to waylay him. Now we have completed chapter 3, and now we move on to chapter 4. The cylinder opens. Anyway, welcome Ryu and Adi to the stream. I am just reading War of the Worlds. We've bypassed around 3 chapters already. Now we're moving on to 4. I will need a cup of water. I'm not sure how long will this stream will go for. How's both of your days? Sorry, the cup is floating again. Oh my god, my throat is really dry. How many chapters are there? Quite a fair bit, but I won't be finishing them. I'll probably be limiting this to about 1.5 hours so that you guys don't get too tired out. I'll probably end it after, let me just see here, right? I will need to have to look in the bibliography. Hold on. Let me just see. I'll probably end it on the heat ray, which is page 24. Either that or the heat ray in Chopham Road. At least an hour and a half should be good enough. We'll end this at around 3:30. I'm looking at my clock over there. Yeah, 3:30. So we just end it at 3:30, and then you know, have a little bit of fun, and let's see if I can come up with questions that you guys can answer. I'm just turning into a teacher now. That's good. That's good. Anyway, what else are we doing? Okay, so now we will move on to A Cylinder Opens, which is chapter 4. And just as a reminder, we have finished about 3 chapters already of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. And the music is still playing. Okay, that's good. Alright, moving on to chapter 4. When I returned to the common, the sun was setting. Scattered groups were hurrying from the direction of Woking, and 1 or 2 persons were returning. The crowd about the pit had increased, and stood out black against the lemon yellow of the sky. A couple 100 people, perhaps. They were raised voices, and some sort of struggle appeared to be going on about the pit. Strange imaginings passed through my mind. As I drew nearer, I heard Sten's voice. "Keep back! Keep back!" A boy came running towards me. "It's a moving," he said to me as he passed. "A screwing and a screwing out. I don't like it. I'm going home. I am." I went out to the crowd. There were really, I should think, 200 or 300 people elbowing and jostling one another. The 1 or 2 ladies there being by no means the least active. "He's fallen into the pit!" cried someone. "Keep back!" said several. The crowd swayed a little, and I elbowed my way through. Everyone seemed greatly excited. I heard a peculiar humming sound from the pit. "I say," said Ogilvy, "help keep these idiots back. We don't know what's in the confounded thing, you know." I saw a young man, a shop assistant in Woking, I believe he was, standing on the cylinder and trying to scramble out of the hole again. The crowd had pushed him in. The end of the cylinder was being screwed out from within. Nearly 200 feet of the shining screw projected. Someone blundered against me, and I narrowly missed being pitched onto the top of the screw. I turned, and as I did, the screw must have come out, for the lid or cylinder fell upon the gravel with a ringing concussion. Sorry, my throat's a bit dry. I need to drink more water after this. I stuck my elbow into the person behind me and turned my head towards the thing again. For the moment that the circular cavity seemed perfectly black, I had sunset in my eyes. I think everyone expected to see a man emerge, possibly something a little unlike Earth's terrestrial man. but in all essentials a man. I know I did. But looking, I presently saw something stirring within the shadow. Grey, billowy movements, one above another, and then two luminous discs like eyes, and something resembling a little grey snake, about the thickness of a walking stick, coiled up of the whirling middle, and wriggled in the air towards me. Then another. A sudden chill came over me. There was a loud shriek from the woman behind. I half turned, keeping my eyes fixed upon the cylinder still, from which other tentacles were now projecting, and began pushing my way back from the edge of the pit. I saw astonishment giving place to horror on the faces of the people about me. I heard inarticulate exclamations on all sides. There was a general movement backwards. I saw the shopman struggling on the edge of the pit. I found myself alone, and saw the other people on the other side of the pit running off. Stand among them. I looked again at the cylinder, and ungovernable terror gripped me. I stood petrified, staring. A big greyish rounded bulk, the size of perhaps a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. Two large, dark-colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. The mask that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded, and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth underneath the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva. Then the whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively. A lank tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder. Another swayed the air. Those who had never seen a Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath its witch-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of this mouth, the gorgon groups of tentacle, the tumultuous beating of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of the movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the earth. Above all, sorry. The greater gravitational energy above earth. Above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes. Were at once vital, intense, inhuman, crippled, monstrous. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of its tedious movement, unspeakably nasty. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. Suddenly the monster vanished. It had toppled over the brim of the cylinder and fallen into the pit, with a thud like the fall of a great mass of leather. I heard it give a peculiar thick cry, and forthwith another of these creatures appeared darkly in the deep shadow of the aperture. I turned, and running madly, made for the first group of trees, perhaps 100 yards away, but I ran slantingly and stumbling, for I could not avert my face from these things. There, among some young pine trees and furze bushes, I stopped, panting, and waited further developments. The common round the sand pits were dotted with people, standing like myself in a half-fascinated terror, staring at these creatures, or rather, at the heaped gravel at the edge of the pit which they lay. And then, with a renewed horror, I saw a round black object bobbing up and down on the edge of the pit. It was the head of the shopman who had fallen in, but showing as a little black object against the hot western sky. Now he got only his head. Now he got his shoulder and knee up, and again he seemed to slip back until only his head was visible. Suddenly, he vanished, and I heard a momentary and I could have fancied a faint shriek had reached me. I had a momentary impulse to go back and help him that my fears overruled. Everything that was then quite invisible, hidden by the deep pit and the heap of sand that the fall of the cylinder had made. Anything coming along the road from Chopham or Woking would have been amazed at the sight. A dwindling multitude of perhaps 100 or more standing in a great irregular circle, in ditches, behind bushes, behind gates and hedges, saying little to one another, and that in short excited shouts, and staring hard at a few heaps of sand. A barrel of ginger beer stood, a queer derelict, black against the burning sky, and in the sand pits were a row of deserted vehicles with their horses feeding out of nose bags or pawing the ground. The next chapter is the heat ray. I need to. My throat hurts. Give me a second. I need to turn on my speakers for a bit. So as we have discerned, viewers, we have actually reached the Martians, and it's almost okay. So I guess, oh, this is actually quite tiring. I really like this though. It's just really nice to just lean back and experience all this. What else am I supposed to say? So I guess we can continue on to the heat ray, and then after that, I think I'll stop the stream because yeah, it's a really great story. I highly recommend it. It's well, it's a dated extrication of alien life form, and very highly isolated, as it was like it was it was used it was during the time where aliens weren't really discussed. Wells was the only one doing it, and he was, having fun with his explanation. So basically, yeah. So I hope you could follow my reading chart, and I will continue on to the heat ray, and then we'll stop for today, and we'll try and see whether for the next stream, I think 2 weeks after this, we can continue the story. All right. So now for the last chapter for today, we will cover the heat ray. Now you're gonna get to see some real action. Alright, let's do this. After the glimpse I had had of the Martians emerging from the cylinder in which they had come to the Earth from their planet, a kind of fascination paralyzed my actions. I remained standing knee-deep in the heather, staring at the mound that hid them. I was a battleground of fear and curiosity. I did not dare to go back towards the pit, but I felt a passionate longing to peer into it. I began walking, therefore, in a big curve, seeking some sort of vantage and continually looking at the sand heaps that hid these newcomers to our Earth. Once a leash of thin black whips, like the arms of an octopus, flashed across the sunlight and was immediately withdrawn. And afterwards a thin rod rose up, joint by joint, bearing at its apex a circular disc that spun out with a wobbling motion. What could be going on there? Most of the spectators had gathered in 1-2 groups, one a little crowd towards Woking, another a knot of people in the direction of Chopham. Eventually they shared my mental conflict. Sorry, my bad. There were a few near me. One man I approached. He was, I perceived, a neighbor of mine, though I did not know his name, and accosted. But it was scarcely a time for articulate conversation. "What ugly brutes!" he said. "Good God! What ugly brutes!" He repeated this over and over again. "Did you see a man in the pit?" I said, but he made no answer to that. He became silent and stood watching for a time side by side, deriving, I fancy, a certain comfort in one another's company. Then I shifted my position to a little knoll that gave me the advantage of a yard or more of elevation, and when I looked at him presently, he was walking towards Woking. The sunset faded to twilight before anything further happened. The crowd far and away on the left, towards Woking, seemed to grow, and I heard now a faint murmur from it. "Oh, I'm alright, sorry. I was just coughing a little bit." The little knot of people towards Chopham dispersed. There was scarcely an intimation of movement from the pit. It was this, as much as anything, that gave people courage. and I suppose the new arrivals from Woking also helped to restore confidence. At any rate, as the dust came on to a slow, intermittent movement upon the sandpits began, a movement that seemed to gather force as the stillness of the evening about the cylinder remained unbroken. Vertical black figures in 2 or 3 would advance, stop, watch, and advance again, spreading out as they did in a thin irregular crescent that promised to enclose the pit in its attenuated horns. I too, on my side, began to move towards the pit. Then I saw some cabmen. Oh, hold on. Let me just get back up. Then I saw some cabmen, and the others had walked boldly into the sandpits, and I heard the clatter of hoofs and the gride of wheels. I saw a lad trundling off the barrel of apples, and then, within 30 yards of the pit, advancing from the direction of Horsell, I noted a little black knot of men, the foremost of whom was waving a white flag. This was a deputation. There had been a hasty consultation, and since the marshy were evidently, in spite of their repulsive forms, intelligent creatures, it had been resolved to show them, by approaching them with signals, that we too were intelligent. Flutter, flutter went the flag, first to the right, then to the left. It was too far for me to recognize anyone there, but afterwards I learned that Ogilvy, Stent, and Henderson were with the others in this attempt at communication. This little group had in its advance dragged inward, so to speak, the circumference of the now almost complete circle of people, and a number of dim black figures following at discreet distances. Suddenly there was a flash of light, and a quantity of luminous green smoke came out of the pits in 3 distinct puffs, which drove up, one after the other, straight into the still air. This smoke, or flame would be a better word for it, was so bright that the deep blue sky overhead and the hazy stretches of brown common towards Chertsey, set with black pine trees, seemed to darken abruptly as these puffs arose, and to remain the darker after their dispersal. At the same time, the faint hissing noise became audible. Beyond the pit stood the little wedge of people with the white flag at its apex, arrested by these phenomena, a little knot of small vertical black shapes upon the black ground. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out pallid green and faded again as it vanished, and slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a loud droning noise. Slowly the hump shape rose out from the pit, and a ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out from it. Forthwith flashes of actual flame, a black glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet was impinged upon them and suddenly flashed into white flame. It was as if each man was suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. Then, by the light of their own destruction, I saw them staggering and falling, and their supporters turning to run. I stood staring, not yet realizing that this was death leaping from man to man in that little distant crowd. All I felt was that it was something very strange, an almost noiseless and blinding flash of light, and a man fell headlong and lay still. As the unseen shaft of heat passed over them, pine trees burst into fire, and every dry furze bush became one with dull thud, a mass of flames. And far away towards Knaphill, I saw the flashes of trees and hedges and wooden buildings set alight. It was sweeping round, swiftly and steadily, this flaming death, this invisible, inevitable sword of heat. I perceived it coming towards me by the flaming bushes it touched, and was too astounded and stupefied to stir. I heard the crackle of fire in the sandpits, and the sudden squeal of a horse that was as suddenly still. Then it was as if an invisible yet intensely heated finger were drawn across through the header between me and the Martians, and all along a curving line beyond the sandpits, the dark ground smoked and graved and crackled. Something fell with a crash far away to the left where the road from Woking station opens up on the common. Forthwith with the hissing and the humming ceased, and the black dome-like object sank slowly out of sight into the pit. All this happened with such swiftness that I stood motionless, dumbfounded and dazzled by the flashes of light. Had that death swept full circle, it must have inevitably have slain me by surprise. But it passed and spared me, and left the night about me suddenly dark and unfamiliar. The undulating common now seemed dark, and almost to a blackness, except where its roadways lay grey and pale under the deep blue sky of the early night. It was dark, and suddenly void of men. Overhead the stars were mustering, and in the west the sky was still a pale bright, almost greenish blue. The tops of the pine trees and roofs of Horsell came out sharp and black against the western afterglow. The Martians and their applications were altogether invisible, save for that thin mass upon which their restless mirror hobbled. Patches of bush and isolated trees here and there smoked and glowed still, and the houses towards Woking stations were sending up spires of flame into the stillness of the evening air. Nothing was changed save for that and a terrible astonishment. The little group of black specks with the flag of white had been swept out of existence, and the stillness of the evening, so it had seemed to me, had scarcely been broken. Nothing was. It came to me that I was upon this dark, common, helpless, unprotected, and alone. Suddenly, like a thing falling upon me from without, came fear. Without an effort, I turned and began a stumbling run through the heather. The fear I felt was no rational fear, but a panic terror not only of the Martians, but of the dust and stillness all about me. Such an extraordinary effect in unmanning me it had that I ran, sweeping silently as a child might do. Once I turned, I did not dare to look back. I remember I felt an extraordinary persuasion that I was being played with, and with that presently, that when I was upon the very verge of safety, this mysterious death, as swift as the passage of light, would leap after me from the pit about the cylinder and strike me down. And now we have finished chapter 5, the heat ray. And I guess that took 30 minutes. Let's give me a while. Do you guys Shark, do you want to read another, you want me to read another chapter? I feel like we can do one more chapter, but let me see. Let me just yawn a little bit. Oh, you don't mind? Okay. But then again, it has been an hour. I might actually just end the stream here because if I'm not like, it's not like I'm tired. It's actually like my voice is hurting. It's genuinely kind of. It's actually like the roof of my mouth is actually hurting because I've never read for this long, and I just enjoy. I really like it though. I really like it. This is a nice change of pace. Let me just do a brief analysis on the heat ray in Chopham Road. Okay, yeah, this will be a short chapter. Then I can just read this. All right, so we are moving on to chapter 6, the heat ray in Chopham Road, and then after that, I will stop the stream here today, the reading stream here today, and continue on. Okay, that should be good enough. So, chapter 6. It was still a matter of wonder how the Martians were able to slay men so swiftly and so silently. Many think in some way they were able to generate an intense heat in the chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the parabolic mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. No one has actually proved these details. However it is done, it is certain that a beam of heat is the essence of the matter. Heat and invisible instead of visible light. Whatever is combustible flashes into flame at its touch. Lead runs like water, it softens iron, cracks and melts glass. When finally falls upon water incontinently, that it explodes into steam. That night nearly 40 people lay under the starlight about the pit, charred and distorted beyond recognition. and all night the common from Horsell to Maybury was deserted and brightly ablaze. The news of the massacre probably reached Chopham, Woking, and Ottershaw at the same time. In Woking, the number of shops had closed, and when the tragedy had happened, and a number of people, shop people and so forth, attracted by the stories they had heard, were walking over to the Horsell Bridge and along the roads between the hedges that runs out at last upon the common. You may imagine the young people brushed up after the labourers the day, and making this novelty, as they would make any novelty, the excuse for walking together and enjoying a trivial flirtation. You may figure to yourself the hum of voices along the road in the gloaming. And yet, few people in Woking even knew that the cylinder had opened, though poor Henderson had sent a messenger on a bicycle to the post office with a special wire to an evening paper. As these folks came out by twos or threes upon the open, they found little knots of people talking excitedly and peering at the spinning mirror over the sandpits. And the newcomers were no doubt soon infected by the excitement of the occasion. By 8:30, when the deputation were destroyed, there may have been a crowd of 300 people or more at this place, besides those who had left the road to approach the Martians nearer. There were 3 policemen too, one of whom was mounted, doing their best, under instructions from Stent, to keep the people back and deter them from approaching the cylinder. There was some booing from those more thoughtless and excitable souls to whom a crowd is always an occasion for noise and horseplay. Stent and Ogilvy, anticipating some possibilities of a collision, had telegraphed from Horsell to the barracks as soon as the Martians had emerged, for the help of a company of soldiers to protect these strange creatures from violence. After that, they learned to lead that ill-fated advance. The description of their death, as it was seen by the crowd, tallies very close with my own impressions. The 3 puffs of green smoke, a deep humming note, and the flashes of flame. But that crowd of people had a far narrower escape than mine. Only the fact that a hummock of heathery sand intercepted the lower part of the heat ray saved them. Had the elevation of the parabolic meter been a few yards higher, none could have lived to tell that tale. They saw the flashes and the men falling. An invisible hand, as it were, lit the bushes as they hurried towards them in the twilight. Then, with a whistling note that rose above the droning of the pit, the beam swung close over to their heads, lighting the tops of the beech trees that lined the road, and splitting the bricks, smashing down the windows, firing the window frames, and bringing down in a crumbling ruin a portion of the gable of the house nearest to the corner. In a sudden thud, hiss, and glare of the igniting trees, the panic-stricken crowd seemed to have swayed hesitatingly for some moments. Sparks and burning twigs began to fall into the road, and single leaves like puffs of flame, and dresses caught fire. Then came a crying for the common. There were shrieks and shouts, and suddenly a mounted policeman came galloping through the confusion with his hands clasped over his head, screaming, "They're coming!" A woman shrieked, and incontinently everyone was turning and pushing at those behind in order to clear their way into Woking again. They must have bolted as blindly as a flock of sheep. Where the road grows narrower and blacks between the high banks, the crowd jammed, and a desperate struggle occurred. All that crowd did not escape. 3 persons, at least 2 women and a little boy, were crushed and trampled there, left to die amid the terror and the darkness. Alright. So that concludes chapter 6. The chapter 7 we will cover next in the next 2 weeks. And well, for the first reading stream, I think this is made my the roof of my mouth really really long. So if you have any concerns about the grammar that you have faced, let me just turn on the music, and it's time for less spooky music and time for some nice music. Alright, so thank you all for coming to my stream today. As always, it's always nice to see people coming out, and since this is very experimental, I did not know I did not know anyone would show up really. And yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a good day, good Sunday, and take a rest. I might come up with some proper questions next week because I already have some on my mind, really, and yeah, some on my mind, and the questions may require some the questions may require some prior reading, but it's okay. I'm not here to teach you, but I'm here to stream for you guys. Anyway, thank you all for coming to my stream today. Next we will cover War of the Worlds again in the future, and I will try and look for more novels for us to read. Maybe something with less what's it called? Less advanced English, yeah. And less classical English, so we can have an easy reading time. But for now, War of the Worlds it is. As always, I'll come up with a stream schedule as soon as I can and post it either tomorrow or today. So, if anything, thank you for coming. Lord be a day, everybody. I will see you all soon. Bye bye.